Our opening words are adapted from the editor's introduction to the spring 2021 edition of UU World magazine. Our country has been deeply shaken. The past year was cataclysmic as a devastating pandemic swept the globe. It touched every aspect of our lives and revealed long-standing inequities. Lies told repeatedly about COVID-19 aided its rampant spread in the United States. After Minneapolis police killed George Floyd, Black Lives Matter protests amplified diverse voices for justice. Then fraudulent claims about the presidential election fomented an insurrection at the Capitol and undermined democracy at its root. This special issue examines how we can create a more just, equitable, and anti-racist society, reflecting fundamental values of the Unitarian Universalist faith tradition. Our intention is to have a conversation about the fault lines of injustice in our nation and to imagine how we can rebuild our democracy. We hope you will find inspiration in stories about how UUs and our partners showed up for justice and highlighted possibilities for change. One stark reality is that the disparities for Black and Brown people only became more acute during the pandemic, and the heartbreaking loss of life from COVID was significantly higher in communities of color. We hope this special edition of UU World helps you grapple with these critical issues through compelling voices and fertile thought. Our lens reflects enduring UU commitments to a multicultural world, democratic principles, and to our common humanity. Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Reading's online worship service. I am Kelly Tone. My pronouns are she, her, and I am your worship leader this morning. I'm so glad you've joined us today. And now, please find the words for our chalice lighting in the online order of service.
In the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment, we gather this day. May the flame we now kindle be to us a symbol of the holiness we seek.
You're Unitarian, Universalist, the true, no open mind, loving heart, and helping hands.
Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Reading, or UUCR. I'm Allie Tome. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them. Welcome to our worship service and welcome to our online church community. We welcome you to join with us as we seek to fulfill our mission to nurture and explore individual spirituality, build a committed and loving community, and to heal the world. If you are with us for the first time, a special welcome. Please check back to our webpage and look for the link titled "Click for more information about our virtual worship options during COVID-19." This link will lead you to much of what you need to make a broader and deeper connection here at UUCR. For example, you can sign up for our email newsletter, where you can get information about ongoing events and other news from the church. In the newsletter, you can also get the link for the virtual coffee and conversation time that follows the service today and each week. On the webpage, you can also find contact information for Melissa Martin, our Member Services Coordinator. She can help you make more connections with UUCR. And finally, you are welcome here because we believe you belong here. Maybe just the next hour, but we hope for longer. You are welcome here, and we are glad you are here, just as we are glad to be together this morning. And now, please look to the chat for the words to our opening hymn, number 360 in the gray hymnal, "Here We Have Gathered."
Here we have gathered side by side, circle of kinship, come and step inside. May all who seek here find a kindly word. May all who speak here feel they have been heard. Sing now together this our heart's own song. Here we have gathered, called to celebrate days of our lifetime, matters small and great. We of all ages, women, children, men, infants and sages, sharing what we can. Sing now together this our heart's own song. Life has its battles, sorrows and regret, but in the shadows let us not forget. We who now gather know each other's pain. Kindness can heal us as we give, we gain. Sing now in friendship this our heart's own song.
Rob Craig Coleman. My pronouns are he, him, and his. Let us take a moment to be still, to be at rest, to quiet our restless minds, to pause and take time to just breathe. And as we breathe, let us join our hearts and minds together in prayerful meditation. Spirit of life, known by many names, yet by no name fully known, we gather today with hopes and dreams, with fears and wounds, with joys and sorrows. May our hopes and dreams find life. May our joys find wings. May our fears be calmed. May our wounds and sorrows be heard and healed. Today, we witness the sorrow of Katie McQuaige Lucas and her husband, Chris. Chris's grandmother passed into the mysteries of death, and Katie asked for prayers for the Lucas family. Let us render what healing we can to the Lucas family with our words, our thoughts, our prayers, and our spiritual energy as they grieve this loss and begin the slow, painful process of adjusting to a world without their mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother's physical presence. Today also we'll be looking at the state of things in our country and how we can respond to the churning events going on all around us. In that context, let us hear the words of Tamara Labak in her prayer for America. She prays, God of many names, you who has endowed us with the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of passion, happiness, let us remember this day that in this country there is no national religion, there is no superior race, there is no preferable gender or orientation. We gather holding a common value that the glory of this country rests first and foremost in its diversity. Out of many ideas, out of many beliefs, out of many views, out of many voices, out of many passions, out of many experiences, we are one. Help us, O God, to never forget that we need not be alike to live and love alike. We ask for forgiveness this day for our national and individual transgressions. When we have chosen inaction or silence in the face of injustice and abuse of power, and our failure to claim our own. We ask for forgiveness for when we have not known our neighbor, fed our hungry, or equipped our future generation with knowledge and love. We ask for a blessing on this nation according to our own faith and forms, and pledge our voice in support of moving closer and closer to freedom. These and all the prayers of our hearts, we pray now in the silence. In the names of those who have come before and those who are yet to be, in the names of all the helpers of humankind. Amen.
Each Sunday, UUCR gives half the money received in the collection plate to a nonprofit organization that shares our UU values. It's a simple yet powerful way for each of us to help heal the world by learning about and supporting the good works of charitable organizations and becoming more involved in our community. Our Share the Plate recipient for the month of August is Improbable Players. Improbable Players is a theater company founded in 1984 that is dedicated to the prevention of substance use disorder. All of their shows are based on true stories, and all of their actors are in long-term recovery from substance use disorder. Improbable Players' mission is to set the stage for prevention by educating the public about addiction and recovery through dramatic performances and theater workshops. Their performances are uniquely impactful because the actors have lived the stories they perform. Their workshops give students the space and tools to combat social pressures and find coping strategies that work for them. Improbable Players strives to be a model of diversity and inclusion. The board, staff, actors, and volunteers reflect the demographics of the communities they serve, which allows them to excel at communicating the effects of substance use disorder. Please give generously to our virtual Sunday Share the Plate offering to support the work of Improbable Players and the mission of UUCR.
Our commitment to democracy is theological. UUA President Reverend Susan Frederick Gray.
Our democracy in the United States is fragile. We have reached a watershed moment that will determine how we move forward as a nation. Despite its founding principles, we have never lived up to the promise of justice for all. We the people has never fully included everyone. It was only 56 years ago when the Voting Rights Act finally expanded and protected the right to vote for Black Americans. And it was only realized because of the prophetic leadership, organizing, and sacrifices of those in the civil rights movement.
We recognize it is no small endeavor to create a truly democratic society. Unitarian Universalist commitment to justice, equity, and democracy is not just political or moral, it is fundamentally theological. It grows from our affirmation of the inherent worth and dignity of every person and the knowledge that we are all interconnected. It reflects the fact that our theology is not so much concerned with the afterlife, but is accountable to human experience and the conditions of people's lives here and now. Human dignity and interdependence are the foundation of our commitment to a multiracial, pluralistic democracy.
True democracy is inclusive, and we each have a stake in helping to determine our country's future. We launched UU the Vote in 2019, knowing how much our democracy was under attack. When I first imagined the campaign, I hoped we could reach 1 million potential voters. I also wondered, could we really do it? In the end, we reached over 3 million people. We played a critical role in the largest, most accessible, transparent election in history.
UU the Vote was a strategic campaign rooted in a vision of a more just, equitable, and anti-racist society. It was intended to strengthen partnerships between our congregations and organizing efforts led by Black, Indigenous, and Latinx people in directly impacted communities.
Living the values that Unitarian Universalism calls us to is not easy. They call us to audaciously imagine a world where no one is disposable and where everyone can thrive. They also call us to the struggle that brings these ideas to fruition.
It is easy to feel overwhelmed by the significant challenges before us in addressing the pandemic fairly, in combating white supremacy, and in defending democracy against attacks that persist in a myriad of systemic forms, including new restrictive voter suppression laws. This is why we must stay engaged and organized to defend and expand equity for everyone. It is the reason why this special edition of UU World focuses on democracy.
Let us draw strength, joy, and hope from one another and all we have accomplished. May it inspire us to keep dreaming big, to keep moving forward, to keep organizing for liberation, and to keep answering the call of love and justice.
When Rob Craig Coleman asked me in June if I'd lead a worship service, he said, I was skimming through the latest UU World magazine, thinking about how to frame a worship service around the theme. And then a little later, I came across your most recent Facebook post, which got me thinking more about the theme. And then I put two and two together and thought, Kelly is just the person to put something together. So may my presence here be a reminder to be careful what you put on social media. In all seriousness, my first thought after saying yes was, how am I supposed to take 37 pages on issues that weave in and out of our political process, distill it into a sermon, and not cost us our tax-exempt status? I can think of several reasons why Rob asked me. It's no secret I'm a political and electoral process wonk. I love the way democracy is all supposed to work. Every July 4th, I encourage our household to read or listen to the Declaration of Independence. Yes, I missed my eldest's 13th birthday because I was at an annual political activist conference, and I do watch all State of the Union speeches, not just the ones I think I'll agree with. Lastly, for 17 years, I've been a regular, albeit amateur writer at a large political blog. It'll be just like writing a blog, Rob said, except you'll share it in oral rather than written form. Well, thanks to the ongoing work of our AIM team towards better accessibility and inclusion practices, I'm glad to say it's both. What Rob didn't know is that for several years in the late 2000s, I also wrote for a now defunct blog, Street Prophets. Its tagline was, "Where Religion and Politics Intersect," and it brought together writers from a variety of religious denominations to foster discussion on the place of religion in political discourse. I loved writing there, and I am sure Street Prophets would have enjoyed this discussion. I hope you will too. My intention today is not simply to provide a synopsis of what many of you likely have already read. I do hope to encourage those of you who haven't to check out either your physical copy or the electronic version at uuworld.org. And I hope to share with you my sincerely held belief that the work of rebuilding our fragile, fractured democracy is something we as Unitarian Universalists must undertake not in spite of our religious beliefs, but because of them. As we heard in our opening words, this past year was cataclysmic. It touched every aspect of our lives and revealed long-standing inequities. Think about the extended year that was 2020 and early 2021. We began 2020 a fractured people at all levels, nationally, in our states, our cities and towns, our neighborhoods, and even our own families. Political divisions were becoming even more frenzied, and then the world as we knew it changed due to the global coronavirus pandemic. As our world shrunk from global to, for many of us, the walls of our own dwelling, we were rocked by the brutal murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. Election Day, that pinnacle of our democratic process, occurred under circumstances never before seen, and to say that events from November culminating in the January 6th insurrection were unprecedented does an injustice to the very concept of unprecedented. A cataclysmic year indeed. And then the spring issue of UU World arrived with its stated goal to have a conversation about the fault lines of injustice in our nation and to imagine how we can rebuild our democracy. The editors divided content on these 37 pages into 3 parts, so let's take a look at each in turn. Part 1, Showing Up for Justice. This section opened with something you've heard about from involved members of our congregation, UU the Vote, our denominational initiative to engage, motivate, and work towards electoral justice for all. From the UU the Vote website, UU the Vote was imagined as an all-hands-on-deck project to articulate UU values in the public square and activate and organize Unitarian Universalists on a mass scale. It was motivated by 2 primary objectives. First, responding to the moral call to combat the rise of white supremacy and fascism and imagine a just society where all have inherent worth and dignity, where our communities are governed democratically, and where we live sustainably. And second, the opportunity to move Unitarian Universalists to embody our values by centering the marginalized and building organizing infrastructure across the UU ecosystem. The UUA, our congregations and associated groups are 501c3 organizations, meaning we, can engage in issue advocacy, voter education, get out the vote drives, combat voter suppression, etc. Endorsing candidates explicitly is not allowed. What does this mean in practice? UU the Vote made over 117,000 calls to Texas primary voters the week of UUA Virtual General Assembly 2020. Partnering with Vote Forward, it sent more than 1.5 million postcards and letters to voters. And more than 800 volunteers made calls in January prior to the Georgia runoff election, and without a doubt helped to elect 2 senators whose values more closely align with our own than their predecessors. It's clearly stated that this was not a mere one-year engagement. Going forward, UU the Vote wants to channel UUs who got mobilized during the election to hold national and local officials accountable to campaign promises that include addressing white supremacy, creating systemic responses to the pandemic, and reestablishing confidence in the democratic process. Also spotlighted in this part was the area of justice for transgender people. Written by civil rights lawyer and LGBTQ rights activist Sam Ames. They are a member of TRUST, Transgender Religious Professional UUs Together, the group who shared the stories of transgender and non-binary UU religious professionals that formed the basis of a summer service you may remember several years ago. I cried as I read in Sam's article that over 70% of transgender UUs do not feel fully included in their own congregations. Asked what advocacy work they feel is most important for the transgender community, Sam named violence, healthcare, racism, and policing as issues most affecting the lives of transgender people. In addition, Sam states explicitly that in our UU congregations, we need to move past naming our pronouns and onto confronting our deeply rooted transphobia and centering of cisgender people. They close with the following. If we're going to fight for a world that reflects our principles, we first need to live them. The last area lifted up in this part is a fundamental part of democracy, citizenship. I learned more about what I did not know in this article than in any of the others. Of the many times our government has defined who is a citizen of the United States by taking away citizenship from particular individuals and groups. This may feel like an issue from our past, when citizenship was only for white immigrants, or the Expatriation Act of 1907, which caused American women to forfeit their U.S. citizenship if they married foreign-born men. Note, American men marrying foreign-born women did not suffer the same consequence. However, as recently as the past 4 years, we've had a president who advocated eliminating birthright citizenship for children of immigrants. Justice for all depends on citizenship not being used as a political bargaining chip, carrot or stick. Part 2, We the People. Rebuilding and restoring our democracy means reflecting on just who the we the people exalted in our Declaration of Independence are. Spoiler, it's not everyone. Author Joshua Eaton writes, "It all felt apocalyptic, in the original Greek sense of apocalypsis, or revelation. Like the visions of St. John on Patmos, these past months pulled back a curtain and showed us unsettling things about ourselves as a country, things with roots that go much deeper than this pandemic or even a presidency. Lurking behind that curtain was a mountain of injustice, in which wealthy, white, Christian, generally men, sit at the top of the pyramid, and all others form the large, unequal base. Insidious, deeply rooted structural racism rears its head at every turn, from access to health care and equity in treatment even once accessed, to who has an easy path to exercising their right to vote. Black, Latinx, and Indigenous people do not have the same expectations of safety from those sworn to serve and protect. Instead, they quite literally are shot for no reason or deprived of oxygen for over 8 minutes, even as bystanders scream for help and record the scene. Moreover, when these groups protest injustice, they are met by police and government officials with markedly worse treatment than that received by armed white extremists perpetuating a voter fraud lie who stormed and desecrated the nation's capital, then simply walked out. We learned exactly who are truly essential workers. I see you, grocery deliverers, farm workers and food providers, retail workers, childcare and education professionals. These essential workers are paid nowhere near what they should be, and in many cases lack the health care and benefits they and all people deserve. Righting these injustices require us to stop centering ourselves and side as allies with marginalized groups. This means using our privilege in whatever way our Black, Latinx, Asian, and Indigenous neighbors need, not in the ways we feel they need. Part 3, the policing crisis. The final part of this UU World edition is devoted specifically to the issue of discriminatory policing and legal systems and ways in which we can get involved. The section begins. The United States has the highest incarceration rates in the developed world and glaring racial disparities in sentencing. Our increasingly militarized police force kills civilians, disproportionately Black, Latinx, and Indigenous, at a rate many times higher than in other comparable democracies. Highlighted in this section is the work of First Unitarian Church in Louisville, Kentucky, which became a sanctuary during protests demanding justice for Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. For 5 nights, it was a center for hundreds of protesters, providing safety, food, medical, and pastoral care. Police even had plans, not carried out, to storm the church. Think about that. Storming a church, providing sanctuary. I learned about the unjust cash bail system, which leaves poor people in jail prior to trial simply because they cannot afford to post bail. This system, in effect, makes poverty a crime and causes a cascade of effects. If you're unable to post bail, you cannot get to work, so you can't pay rent, so you lose your housing and even custody of your children. Pleading guilty so as to not remain in jail can cost people their housing anyway, and in some cases, their right to vote. One way in which our UU congregations witness against police injustice is by visible support of Black Lives Matter. For example, our own banner. Locally, Lexington's Fallen Church was targeted by right-wing protesters, and they held a countering worshipful witness for justice. The statement Fallen's minister, the Reverend Claire Feingold Thorne, made is particularly meaningful. White people have been ignoring racism for a very long time, and it hasn't made it go away. I think it's really important to claim our values and show up and put our bodies on the line. Page after page of this issue of UU World share ways in which our Unitarian Universalist members and congregations have shown up to do the work of rebuilding democracy by fighting inequity and injustice. I hope you're thinking of ways in which you personally are doing such work, or find inspiration to get involved after today. But perhaps some of you are thinking, why are we discussing this in church? What makes civics and political activism a religious practice? Let me share my thoughts on why. I've been a civic activist ever since secondary school, when I joined my mom standing out prior to a contentious school budget vote. Spoiler, we lost by 3 votes, further cementing my belief that every vote always matters. I've been assigned the book UU since 1994, and one of the things that drew me so strongly to the denomination is its emphasis on undertaking actions in the here and now because they're the right thing to do, versus doing good in the hope of some reward in the potential hereafter. As we heard in our reading today, Unitarian Universalists' commitment to justice, equity, and democracy is not just political or moral. It is fundamentally theological. Consider just a few of our UU principles. The first calls us to recognize the inherent worth and dignity of all people. This includes those who are poor, marginalized, incarcerated, undocumented. It includes those with whom we agree and those with whom we do not. It includes people who look, live, love, vote like us, and those who do not. The second calls us to exercise justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. When justice remains a privilege of the few, our faith calls us to act. When few know the difference between equality, when everyone has access to the same resources and opportunities, and equity, resources and opportunities are allocated depending on individual circumstances to allow equal outcomes, we have work to do. When separating families is policy, getting active to change this is the UU thing to do. The fourth principle says that all deserve a free and responsible search for truth. Note the word responsible. Gaslighting, lies, and misinformation about election integrity, movements such as Black Lives Matter or Antifa, vaccines, and more, spread by those who seek to dismantle democracy, make it impossible for many in our nation to engage in a truly free or responsible search for truth. Our faith calls us to educate ourselves and to speak out against such misinformation and provide accurate sources for all to utilize. And then there's our fifth principle, which affirms the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. That seems a pretty direct charge, don't you think? This summer, I both voted as a UU General Assembly delegate and also became a delegate to the State Democratic Convention. While seemingly unrelated, I see both as expressions of my UU faith. I encourage you to consider all our principles and seek your own meaning as to how they relate to the task of rebuilding democracy. Also, I would be remiss if I left out a currently proposed eighth principle, for which, on this virtual pulpit, I declare my wholehearted support. It reads, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. We must work now and every hour of our days to dismantle the inherent systems of structural racism and bias in all our spaces." I close with these words from Louisville, Kentucky activist and Muslim leader Rina Paracha. "We love the UUs. They are always on the side of justice, even if it's at their own expense. And that's not just in Louisville. When protesters learned that First Unitarian would be a sanctuary church, we relaxed. Friends, may we strive always to be seen in this way. Blessed be, and amen."
People get ready, there's a train a-coming. Don't need no baggage, just get on board. All you need is faith to hear the diesels humming. Don't need no ticket, you just thank the Lord. get on board. All you need is faith to hear the diesels humming. Don't need no ticket, you just thank the Lord. Don't need no ticket, thank the Lord. You don't need no ticket, you just thank the Lord. We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves all mourning. Oh, we'll build a promised land can be. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land where we bring up good tidings to all the afflicted and all those who mourn, and we'll give them garlands instead of ashes. Oh, we'll build a land where peace is born. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll be a land building up ancient cities, raising up devastations from old, restoring ruins of generations. Oh, we'll build a land of people so bold. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. Come build a land where the mantles of praises resound from spirits, one faith and one sweet, where like oaks of righteousness stand her people. Oh, come build a land, my people we seek. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream.
We extinguish the flame, but
But
not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Henry David Thoreau, Judith Sargent Murray, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, Reverend Joseph H. Jordan, Martha and Reverend Waitzel Sharp, Viola Liuzzo, Levi Draheim, Alandria Williams, Whitney M. Young, Jr. Just a few of the many, many Unitarian Universalists who have lived their religious ideals and made a difference in the struggle for justice. As our worship here concludes and the work begins, let us each consider how we may add ourselves to this list.